In comics, when it comes to female characters, DC reigns supreme thanks to a rich and vast roster of ladies that have made and continue to make history to this day. Everyone knows about the A-listers, such as Lois Lane, Catwoman, Wonder Woman, and so on. But there is one woman so dark and rough, she's capable of scaring Green Arrow, Black Canary, Huntress, and even Batman himself. She's also the woman responsible for the existence of Booster Gold, as well as a trailblazer who paved the way for richer, more fully realized female characters, and a hero that broke the mold and dared to do what only the male superheroes were doing. With such high qualities, you would think that I'm talking about one of comics' biggest stars, yet that's not the case. In fact, today we will take a close look at one of DC's greatest creations, yet one that remains within the forgotten corners of the DC universe. Rose Forest, better known as Thorn, is the deadliest, yet most beautiful flower in Metropolis, and the bleakest, yet most compelling ally of Superman. She's a tragic character, so dusky and blinded by rage that she looks as though she was made for a place like Gotham City. Now, to avoid any confusion, I just want to clarify that this video is about Rose Forest, the second Thorn, not Rose Canton, the first Thorn, who debuted on 1947 as a Flash villain, and who also happens to be the mother of Jade and Obsidian, as well as the ex-wife of the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Thorn is the answer to the question, what would happen if someone with a split personality became a superhero? Rose Forest is a shy, soft, God-fearing woman who lost her father to a criminal organization called the 100. And as a result of the trauma, she developed a second personality that gathers all the anger, the pain, the chaos that Rose had repressed all her life, letting it loose on those stupid enough to cross her. So every time Rose goes to sleep, the Thorn comes out to play, hunting down all the members of the 100, but also taking down any criminal or crook that she comes across. Now, despite having debuted almost 60 years ago, and despite being a character so complex, so fascinating, with a story and concept that is downright brilliant, Thorn has yet to become a well-known figure within the DC universe. She has no dolls, no figures, no posters, no statues, and no merchandise of any kind. She's never been adapted anywhere, live action or animated, and remains as the epitome of an underdog, despite having all the right qualities to become hugely popular. Thorn was created by the legendary duo of Ross Andru and Robert Kanigher. Ross is the creator of The Punisher, and Robert is the creator of Black Canary, Barry Allen, The Metal Men, The Suicide Squad, Ragaman, Star Sapphire, and even Poison Ivy. Speaking of which, most people either confuse Poison Ivy with Thorn or simply dismiss her as a Poison Ivy clone, when in reality both characters are excellent. Beyond excellent, actually. And both have a rich and very different background, sharing only physical similarities, really. Thorn's journey began on 1970, when she made her debut as a backup story on the Lois Lane Superman's Girlfriend series, beginning on issue 105 and lasting a total of 26 issues, right before the Lois Lane comic was cancelled. In these backup stories, she essentially seeks revenge for what happened to her father, hunting down each and every member of the 100, crossing paths with not only Lois Lane and Superman, but even Poison Ivy herself. On 1979, Thorn had her first team-up with Superman, in a story that takes place in Superman 336, where Superman accidentally sets Thorn off and then tries to contain her. After her run as a backup feature for Lois Lane and teaming up with the Man of Steel, Thorn would reappear in a two-part storyline from The Brave and the Bold, teaming up with the Dark Knight himself, Batman, where they joined forces against some of the remaining members of the mustache community. However, near the end of the 80s, and after the Crisis on Infinite Earths massive shakedown, Thorn would reappear on 4 issues of the Booster Gold series, saving his life and teaming up with him to take down the 100. Now, this story could really go unnoticed if not for one little detail, the type of detail that could change everything. This storyline plants the seeds of something that would blossom almost 4 decades later, but more on that later. During the 90s, Thorn reappeared on several titles and was around on some of the biggest events of the decade, going all the way from Action Comics, Superman Man of Steel, Showcase, Green Arrow, and even Adventures in the DC Universe, which, by the way, is the closest she has ever been to being adapted onto another medium, as this series takes place on the DCAU, spawning from Batman the Animated Series. And had Bruce Timm and company not chosen original characters over established ones, who were pretty much begging to be featured, Thorn could have been a wonderful addition to the Superman animated series. But regardless, the 90s were easily Thorn's busiest decade, beginning with her frequent appearances in The Adventures of Superman, where she is established as a steady vigilante from Metropolis, who takes care of the things even Superman can't. During this time, Thorn would interact with other Metropolis heroes, earning the respect of everyone who crossed her path, such as Gangbuster, Supergirl, and others. However, Thorn finally became a leading character in a 2-part storyline from Showcase 95. In this story, we see glimpses of her previous adventures in the form of exposition. After that, Thorn would guest star on 3 issues of Green Arrow, teaming up with Connor Hawke when he went to Metropolis. Now, this team-up would continue in the pages of Showcase 96, where Connor confesses he's actually scared of Thorn, and is glad that they're both on the same side. Thorn was also a major player in the 6th issue of the Batman-Superman World's Finest series, which chronicles the first time the 2 heroes met. In this story, Batgirl and Thorn serve as the female counterparts of the World's Finest. And it's in this story that Batman confesses that even though he respects Thorn, he is also alarmed by her. On 2001, Thorn would appear frequently on the first Harley Quinn ongoing series, with a brand new look designed by the amazing Terry Dodson. Now, Thorn's role in the series was a bit limited, given how the Harley Quinn book was a lighthearted and fun adventure, which is far from what Thorn is actually all about. By the way, this would be the first time Thorn meets Poison Ivy in the modern continuity, as the last time they met was back in the 70s on the Lois Lane series. Now, you might notice that this Thorn is much more tanned and sports a brown wig rather than a red one. Well, this was done to further distance Thorn from Poison Ivy, as one of the most recurring complaints from fans was the similarities between them. Then, on 2004, Thorn would finally have her own limited series in the modern continuity, written by the controversial Gail Simone, with art by Adriana Melo. The series made several changes to her origin, which actually clashed with her previous appearances from just a few years prior. This series presented Rose as a long-term patient on a mental institution who suffered from violent outbursts in the form of a second personality, the Thorn. This series also gave Rose 2 new personalities, for a total of 4. Rose, an older, gentle version of the real Rose, which served as a mother figure that she never had. The other personality is Wild Thorn, a vicious, unhinged personality who knows no limits and is willing to do just about anything in a fit of rage. Sadly, in the end, the Thorn miniseries did little to bring Thorn out of her D-level status. However, this version of Thorn would continue to appear in Gale's Birds of Prey run, though I found her appearances in that series to be completely wasted, as she was basically nothing more than a plot vehicle. Now, there is one thing her appearances did show us, and that is that both Black Canary and Huntress are frightened by her. Now, there is a very puzzling contradiction with Simone's take on Thorn. You see, Gail Simone is quite famous, or rather infamous, For her vocal disdain on how female characters are usually portrayed in comics, whether as over-centralized eye candy, plot devices, or simply extensions of the male characters. Yet her revamp of Thorn is everything she has complained about for years, and what has made her such a high-profile name in comics. Number one, her Thorn looks like a stripper or someone who does adult movies. Nothing about her suit or lack thereof screams crime fighter. And for those who might say, well, her original design was pretty similar. Yes and no. The OG Thorn was considerably more covered up, not to mention that Thorn had already moved on from those revealing outfits to wear suits much more suitable for kicking butt. And honestly, those were far more flattering. In fact, Terry Dodson unknowingly designed what I think is the absolute best Thorn suit of all time. It's simple, practical, and looks great. So why Gale decided to go back for such a look is beyond me, as all I could think about when I see this Thorn is Carmen Electra, Carmen Electra, Carmen Electra. On 2011, during the New 52 massive relaunch, Thorn was reimagined as a hybrid between the original Thorn and the second one. In this continuity, Rose is depicted as a shy schoolgirl with a split personality, becoming Thorn at night to take revenge on those who bully and mistreat her. This version of Thorn has no interest in heroism and does not care about others, acting purely out of personal interest. However, the most interesting aspect about this rendition is the fact that the plot from this comic is almost identical to the one from the 2018 thriller Look Away, starring India Isley. Obviously, there are differences between the comic and the film, but there are far more similarities than differences. Another interesting aspect about the New 52 version is that the cover went viral at a time where the word viral wasn't even being used. The cover was shared and posted countless times by people who know nothing about comics, or much less the character of Thorn, and so the cover became a somewhat of a meme. This version of Thorn, however, was never explored any further. Now, Thorn took almost 8 years of non-appearances before reappearing on 2019 on the Brian Michael Bendis run of Action Comics, where she played a very big role. However, right from the start, we were able to see just how different this Thorn was to the one we have known for so long. You see, while the previous appearances of Thorn showed her to be driven by anger, conflicted, and brutal in her practices, there was always still a semblance of control. She knew her limits and had earned the respect of DC's greatest heroes. But the Bendis version had none of those qualities, showing an emotional instability and a brutality that had never been seen before. She was basically breaking necks left and right. Then, on Brian Michael Bendis' Millennium series from a few years later, Bendis continued using Thorn and made her the protagonist, establishing her as an eternal character, essentially immortal, having walked through all the ages of DC's history completely unaffected by time. In this story, we see her first seeking aid from an elderly Supergirl, because apparently, through the ages, Thorn became more and more aggressive, to the point where she became an actual menace to society. And it's here that we see Thorn's journey through flashbacks. At one point, Thorn relocated to Neo Gotham, where she would clash with Batman Beyond due to her deadly ways. Centuries later, she would encounter Kamandi, the last boy on Earth, where she would steal the Superman suit. And after gliding through time in many different eras, Thorn eventually finds herself in the 25th century, where she would end up meeting a goofy security guard named John, who is immediately smitten by her. Though after not getting much of a response from Rose, he tries to impress her by going back in time. This man right here would eventually become Booster Gold. So apparently Thorn was responsible for the creation of Booster Gold. The Thorn story ends when she signs up to join the Legion of Superheroes. Now, I honestly appreciate Bendis bringing Thorn back into the spotlight, as she truly deserves being featured much more than she has. The problem is, once again, just like Gail Simone, Bendis took a lot of liberties with the character that feel out of place. For instance, Bendis made her not only mentally unstable and a killer, but also strong enough to throw punches with Superman himself. Something that was never explained. And it would seem like whenever a writer works on a character whose legacy and history isn't as long or hasn't had as much impact as the legacy characters, they are given much more liberty to either retcon or alter the character as they see fit, even when it clashes with everything that had been done previously. Now, having said that, just what powers and abilities does Thorn have? Well, Thorn is a highly skilled fighter, though her actual martial arts level is still unknown. We know she was trained in self-defense by her father, but we don't really know the details. However, it seems like it's high enough to be able to take down on multiple armed men, overpowering any kind of opponent even when they are twice her size. And without any kind of trouble, really. She is also quite agile, not to mention fast, able to jump around the rooftops of Metropolis without breaking a sweat, and dodging firearms and blasts as if she was simply doing a cardio session. She also carries several thorny weapons, such as little spikes that are used as projectiles, also as tear gas, explosives, and even a powerful acid to crack metal. She also wields a pair of extremely sharp daggers or blades, which are quite dangerous. And then there's the whip, which is filled with spikes and is extremely painful. Now, as far as superhuman skills and powers go, Thorn allegedly has none, though I'm going to show you a few instances where that can be a little contradictory. For example, when Rose sleeps and Thorn wakes, her height, facial features, eye color, and even her fingerprints change, which only makes sense if she was a metahuman. Or can any of you do any of those things? I don't think so. Now, given her separate identities, the Thorn persona has a strength level that goes beyond what Rose or any female human would be able to have, able to hurt characters like Black Canary, Connor Hawk, or even metahumans in a remarkable way. Thorn is also seemingly unaffected by either hypnosis, sedatives, or anesthesia, displaying a tolerance for pain that no other female character would be able to tolerate, even going as far as staying conscious while going under surgery. Thorn also has a mind so strong that not even Batman was able to crack it. Now, there are some inconsistencies in the way the writers usually depict just how good of a fighter she actually is. On one hand, she is so physically imposing that she can intimidate several of DC's greatest fighters, such as Black Canary, Connor Hawk, and Batman. But on the other hand, she has also been depicted as being so unpolished that even a rookie Barbara Gordon was able to knock her out cold in a blink of an eye. And Harley Quinn, who has never been known for being a formally trained martial artist, was able to beat her up several times. So whether this is a case of biased writing or something else entirely is anyone's guess. And then there is the immortality factor that was hinted at during the 80s and recently confirmed by Bendis. So I'm leaning towards the fact that she is metahuman. Like I previously said, Thorn is a pioneer when it comes to complex, fully fleshed female characters, because while there are many compelling characters in comics, few are as intriguing and fascinating as Thorn, especially when you take into account that she made her debut in 1970, a time in which such thought-provoking characters weren't exactly abound, which makes her all the more special. Now, let's hope DC finally brings her back from obscurity and gives her the spot she deserves, as one of DC's greatest female characters. But what about you? What do you think? Are you familiar with her? What are your thoughts about the character and her suits? Do you agree or disagree about Gail Simone's version? And what about Bendis? As always, I will be reading you in the comments. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Be safe and well. And remember that every rose has its thorn. Carmen Electra, Carmen Electra, Carmen Electra.